The stagecoach carrying Sarah Felton lurched to a stop in Tascosa, Texas, throwing her against the side window hard enough to bruise her already aching shoulder. And she knew without looking that her wedding dress was now covered in dust from 3 days of hellish travel toward a man she had never met and already feared. She stepped down onto the wooden boardwalk with trembling legs, clutching her small carpetbag to her chest like a shield. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the main street, and the wind carried grit that stung her eyes. Sarah was 22 years old, thin as a willow branch, with auburn hair that had once been carefully pinned, but now hung in disheveled waves around her pale face. Her gray eyes swept the street, searching for the man whose letters had promised her security, whose photograph had shown a stern but respectable-looking merchant. "Miss Felton." A rough voice made her turn. The man approaching was not the one from the photograph. This man was shorter, rounder, with yellowed teeth and breath that reeked of whiskey even from 5 feet away. "I'm here to fetch you to Mr. Peterson's store." Her heart sank further, though she had not thought that possible. "I expected Mr. Peterson himself. He's busy." "Got business to attend to. Come on, then." The man grabbed her arm with thick fingers, and Sarah jerked back instinctively. Something in his eyes made her stomach turn cold. "I can walk myself, thank you." She kept her voice steady through sheer force of will. Her father had taught her that much before the consumption took him 6 months ago, leaving her with nothing but debts and the dubious charity of an uncle who had made it clear she was an unwelcome burden. The walk to Peterson's general store took only a few minutes, but each step felt like a mile. Sarah's mind raced through her limited options. She had 37 cents to her name. The ticket back to St. Louis had cost everything she could borrow. There was nothing to return to anyway. Her uncle had already sold her father's house to pay his debts, keeping the difference for himself. The store was dim inside, smelling of tobacco and lamp oil. A thin woman with suspicious eyes looked up from behind the counter, then quickly looked away. Bad sign. Sarah had learned to read such signs in the past difficult months. "Wait here," the rough man said, disappearing through a door at the back. Sarah stood in the center of the store, her bag still clutched tight, and tried to breathe steadily. Through the front window, she could see the life of Tascosa moving past. Cowboys rode by, some pausing to water their horses at the trough. A painted sign across the street advertised rooms for rent. A dog lay in the shade, panting in the heat. The back door opened, and a man emerged who made Sarah's blood run cold. He was the man from the photograph, but the image had been at least 10 years old and had somehow failed to capture the cruelty in his narrow eyes, or the way his mouth twisted when he looked at her. Taking in every detail of her appearance like she was livestock, he was considering purchasing. "So you came." Robert Peterson was 45, tall and thin, dressed in a pressed suit that seemed at odds with the rough frontier town. "I had wondered if you might lose your nerve, Mr. Peterson." Sarah forced herself to meet his eyes. "Your letters spoke of a partnership. A marriage of mutual respect and benefit. Did they?" He moved closer, circling her slowly. "Well, you're here now. Not much to look at, are you? Skinny, but young enough. You'll do." The casual cruelty in his words hit her like a slap. Sarah had known she was not a beauty, especially now after months of grief and poor eating had hollowed her cheeks and shadowed her eyes. But she had believed his letters, had thought perhaps kindness and companionship might still be possible. "The wedding is arranged for tomorrow morning," Peterson continued. "You'll sleep in the storage room tonight. There are rules you'll need to learn. I expect obedience, Miss Felton, complete obedience. You understand?" Sarah's throat tightened. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Speak up when I address you." "Yes." The word came out barely above a whisper. Yes, sir, he corrected, his voice hardening. Something inside Sarah rebelled. She had lost everything, had traveled across half the country to this harsh place, had steeled herself for a loveless, but perhaps peaceful marriage. But this man, his tone, the way he looked at her, she suddenly knew with absolute certainty that marrying him would destroy whatever was left of her soul. "I need some air," she said abruptly, turning toward the door. Peterson's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. "You need my permission to leave. Let go of me." Sarah's voice shook, but anger was beginning to burn through the fear. "You'll learn." His grip tightened. "Tomorrow you'll be my wife, and then you'll do exactly as I say when I say it. The law will give me that right." Sarah wrenched her arm free with a strength born of desperation and stumbled toward the door. She heard Peterson curse behind her, heard his footsteps, but she was already out on the boardwalk, her bag swinging wild as she ran. She did not know where she was going. The street blurred as tears finally came, tears she had held back for so long. She ran past the saloon, past the hotel, past curious and unsympathetic faces. Her breath came in gasps. The sun was beginning to lower toward the horizon, painting everything gold and red. She reached the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open prairie, and finally her legs gave out. She collapsed beside a scraggly tree, sobbing into her hands. What was she going to do? She could not marry Peterson. She would rather die. But she had no money, no family, nowhere to go. The world stretched out around her, vast and indifferent, and Sarah felt smaller than she ever had in her life. "Madam," a man's voice, low and careful. "Are you hurt?" Sarah looked up through her tears. The man stood a respectful distance away, holding the reins of a sorrel horse. He was tall and lean, dressed in work-worn clothes and dusty boots, a wide-brimmed hat shading his face. As he stepped closer, she could see he was young, perhaps 26 or 27, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of summer sky. There was concern in those eyes, but also caution, as if he knew he might frighten her. "I'm fine," Sarah said automatically, then realized how ridiculous that must sound when she was clearly falling apart beside a tree at the edge of town. "Begging your pardon, madam, but you don't look fine." He crouched down, still keeping distance between them, and his voice was gentle. "My name's Frank Ashford. I work at the Triple Bar Ranch just outside town. Can I help you somehow?" Sarah wiped her face with shaking hands. What could this stranger possibly do? And yet there was something in his voice, something genuine and kind that made her want to tell him everything. "I'm supposed to marry a man tomorrow," she heard herself say. "A man I have never met except through letters, but he is not what he seemed. He is cruel. I cannot marry him, but I have nowhere else to go." The words spilled out of her and fresh tears followed. "I am completely alone." Frank Ashford was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. Then he did something that surprised her. He sat down on the ground, his back against the tree, and pushed his hat back on his head. "That's a hard situation," he said simply. "What's your name?" "Sarah. Sarah Felton." "Well, Miss Felton, I reckon you're right to trust your instincts. A cruel man doesn't get kinder after marriage, usually gets worse." He pulled a canteen from his saddle and offered it to her. "Would you tell me who this man is?" Sarah hesitated, then took the canteen. The water was warm but clean. "Robert Peterson. He owns the general store." Frank's expression darkened. "Peterson, I know him. He had a wife before, about 5 years back. She died under strange circumstances. Some said she fell down the stairs. Others said they'd seen bruises." He met Sarah's eyes directly. "You're right to run. But where can I go?" The helplessness threatened to overwhelm her again. "I have no money, no family. I came here on a mail-order bride arrangement because my father died and left debts, and my uncle made it clear I was not welcome. I have 37 cents and the clothes on my back." Frank was quiet again, thinking. The sun continued its descent, and the evening breeze picked up, bringing the smell of prairie grass and distant cattle. Sarah watched this stranger's face, this cowboy who had no reason to care about her troubles, and wondered why he had not already made his excuses and left. "Miss Felton," he said finally, "I'm going to say something that might sound crazy, but I want you to hear me out." Sarah nodded, too exhausted to do anything else. "I've been working at the Triple Bar for 8 years, saving my money. I've got a piece of land picked out about 15 miles from here along the creek. Good water, good grass. I've been planning to file my claim and start building a house come spring. The only thing holding me back is that it's lonely work, building a life out here. A man does better with a partner." Sarah's heart began to beat faster. She was not sure she understood what he was suggesting. Frank continued, his words careful but sincere. "I'm not saying this because I think you owe me anything, or because I'm looking for something improper. I'm saying it because you need a way out and I could use a wife. A real partnership, Miss Felton. I won't lie and say I can offer you luxury. It would be hard work, simple living, but I can promise you respect, safety, a chance to build something together. You don't even know me." Sarah's voice was barely audible. "That's true, and you don't know me. But here's what I can tell you about myself, and you can judge if it's worth considering." He shifted, leaning forward slightly. "I came out here from Missouri when I was 18. My parents died of fever when I was 16, and I worked odd jobs until I had enough to head west. I've been cowboying ever since, learning the land, learning cattle, saving every dollar I didn't need for basic supplies. I don't drink much. I don't gamble. I've got a temper sometimes, but I've never raised a hand to anyone who didn't deserve it, and I never would hit a woman. I want a family someday, kids, a real home, but I want it built on honesty and partnership, not ownership." Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling. This was insane. She had known this man for less than 15 minutes. But then again, she had not really known Peterson either, had she? She had trusted letters and a photograph and promises that had turned out to be lies. At least Frank Ashford was being honest about what he could and could not offer. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "Why would you take such a risk on a stranger?" Frank smiled for the first time, and it transformed his face, softening the hard edges that the frontier had worn into it. "I suppose for the same reason you came all the way out here in the first place. Sometimes you have to take a chance on hope, even when it seems foolish." His smile faded, and his expression became serious again. "But I want to be clear, Miss Felton. I'm not expecting anything from you that you're not willing to give. If you agree to this, we could marry for practical reasons, but the rest, the real partnership, that would have to grow natural-like. I'd respect your boundaries. You'd have your own space until you felt comfortable otherwise." Sarah's hands twisted in her lap. Every rational part of her mind said this was madness. But what was the alternative? Try to survive alone in Tascosa with no money and no prospects. Return to Peterson and whatever nightmare that marriage would bring. At least Frank Ashford looked at her like she was a person, not property. "Can we build a life together?" The question came out before she could stop it. Really build one, not just survive, but actually make something good. Frank's blue eyes lit up at the question. "Yes, madam, that's exactly what I'm hoping for. It won't be easy and there will be hard times, but I believe we could build something solid, something worth having." Sarah took a shaky breath. "I'm broken," she said quietly. "My father's death, my uncle's betrayal, coming out here to Peterson, I feel like I'm in pieces. I don't know if I have anything to offer you except more hardship." "We're all broken in one way or another," Frank said gently. The frontier has a way of either grinding people down to nothing or giving them a chance to rebuild into something stronger. I'd like to think we could help each other do the rebuilding. He stood up and offered her his hand. What do you say, Miss Felton? Will you take a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than sense? Sarah looked at his outstretched hand. It was calloused and tanned from years of hard work, but steady and strong. She thought about her father, who had always told her to trust her instincts. Her instincts had screamed danger with Peterson. Now, looking at Frank Ashford, they whispered something different, not certainty but possibility. She put her hand in his and let him help her to her feet. Yes, she said, her voice stronger than it had been all day. Yes, I will take that chance. Frank's face broke into a genuine smile of relief and something that might have been joy. Then we should move quickly before Peterson causes trouble. Can you ride? Not well, but I can manage. Good. We'll go to the preacher right now. Then I'll take you out to my camp. It's not much, just a tent and supplies, but you'll be safe there. Tomorrow I'll go into town and buy what we need to get started on the house. Sarah's head spun at how quickly everything was moving, but she found herself nodding. Action felt better than despair. Movement felt better than paralysis. They walked back into town together, Frank leading his horse. Sarah could feel eyes on them, curious and judgmental. She kept her chin up. Let them look. She had made her choice. The preacher's house was a small adobe building near the church. Reverend Thomas answered Frank's knock with a surprised expression that deepened when Frank explained what they needed. You want to marry this young lady? Right now? Yes, sir. Do you even know each other? We know enough, Frank said firmly. Miss Felton is in a difficult situation, and I'm offering her an honorable way out. We're both of age and of sound mind. Will you marry us or not? Reverend Thomas studied them both carefully, then sighed. These are strange times we live in. Yes, I'll marry you. But I'll hold you to those words about honor, young man. I wouldn't have it any other way, sir. The ceremony was brief and simple. Sarah stood beside Frank in the preacher's small parlor, her hand trembling as he slipped a plain silver ring onto her finger. The ring was too large, but Frank curled her fingers around it gently. I'll get it sized proper when I can, he murmured. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them married, Frank did not kiss her. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently and said, "Thank you for trusting me." They left the preacher's house as the last light was fading from the sky. Sarah was now Sarah Ashford, married to a man she had met an hour ago, riding behind him on his horse toward a camp she had never seen. It should have been terrifying. Instead, she felt the first small spark of something she had not felt in months. Hope. The camp was indeed simple, just a canvas tent and a fire ring surrounded by prairie grass that stretched away into darkness. Frank helped her down from the horse and showed her where everything was by lantern light. I've got beans and bacon if you're hungry, he offered. And coffee, though I'll warn you, I make it strong enough to strip paint. Sarah realized she was starving. She had barely eaten on the journey, her stomach too knotted with anxiety. Yes, please, and I don't mind strong coffee. They sat by the fire as Frank cooked, and the silence between them was surprisingly comfortable. Sarah watched him move with the easy efficiency of someone used to taking care of himself, and she felt some of her tension begin to ease. Tell me about your land, she said after a while. The place you want to build. Frank's face lit up, and he began to describe it in detail. The creek that ran year-round, the cottonwood trees, the gentle slope that would protect a house from the worst of the winter winds. He had clearly spent hours thinking about every aspect, planning where the barn would go, where to plant a garden, how to manage the cattle he hoped to raise. I know it's just dreams right now, he said, handing her a plate of food. But I've always believed that if you can see something clear enough in your mind, you can make it real with enough work. It sounds wonderful, Sarah said honestly. I grew up in the city, St. Louis. But my father used to take me to visit his brother's farm when I was small before they had a falling out. I loved it there. The space, the quiet, the way you could see the stars at night. They talked late into the evening, sharing pieces of their lives. Frank told her about learning to rope and ride, about the time he had to spend 3 days in a lined shack during a blizzard, about the beauty of seeing hundreds of cattle moving across the prairie. Sarah told him about her father's bookshop, about the consumption that had taken him slowly and painfully, about her uncle's cold dismissal of her grief. He told me I should be grateful Peterson was willing to take me, she said bitterly. Said I was plain and poor and had no right to expect anything better. Your uncle was a fool, Frank said flatly. You're not plain. You're pale and tired and grieving, but I can see the strength in you. And as for poor, well, we're all poor out here. The only thing that matters is whether you're willing to work. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different tears. Thank you, she whispered. Frank stood and began arranging blankets inside the tent. You'll sleep in here. I'll bed down by the fire. In the morning, we'll figure out the next steps. You don't have to sleep outside, it's your tent. You're my wife, which means your comfort is my responsibility now. Besides, I've slept under the stars more times than I can count. I like it. He paused at the tent opening. Sarah, you did good today. Trusting your instincts, making a hard choice. I want you to know I'll do everything I can to make sure you don't regret it. After he left, Sarah lay on the blankets in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of the prairie. Crickets chirped. Something howled in the distance. The fire crackled. She touched the 2 large ring on her finger and thought about the strange turns life could take. This morning she had been on a stagecoach, dreading her arrival. Tonight she was married to a cowboy who had offered her not just rescue, but partnership. Not just survival, but the chance to build something. She slept better than she had in months. Morning came with the smell of coffee and bacon. Sarah emerged from the tent to find Frank already up, the fire rebuilt, breakfast cooking. Morning, Mrs. Ashford, he said with a shy smile. Sleep all right. Better than I expected, Mr. Ashford. Frank, please call me Frank. Then you should call me Sarah. They ate breakfast together, and Frank laid out his plans for the day. I need to go into town and talk to the land office, file the claim on the property. I'll also need to buy lumber and supplies to start building. It's going to take most of my savings, but I've got enough. He hesitated. I'm a little worried about Peterson. He might cause trouble. Sarah had been trying not to think about Peterson, but Frank was right. She was legally married to Frank now, but that might not stop Peterson from making accusations or causing problems. What should we do? I think you should stay here at camp. Keep the rifle close, though I don't really expect trouble. I'll be back before nightfall. He pulled a small leather pouch from his saddlebag and counted out several coins. This is for you, not much, but it's yours to keep. I believe in a wife having her own money. Sarah stared at the coins. Her uncle had never given her a cent, had made her beg for everything she needed. Frank, I don't need partners, he reminded her gently. That's what we agreed. Partners share. Now, I'm trusting you to keep the camp while I'm gone. Can you manage that? Yes, Sarah said, her throat tight with emotion. I can manage that. After Frank rode away, Sarah set about making herself useful. She washed the breakfast dishes in the creek, scrubbing them with sand as she had seen her father's sister-in-law do years ago. She tidied the camp, swept out the tent, and gathered more firewood. The physical work felt good, purposeful. She was doing something instead of just enduring. Around midday, as she was hanging blankets to air in the sun, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Sarah's heart jumped into her throat. She grabbed the rifle Frank had left, her hands shaking as she checked that it was loaded as he had shown her. But it was not Peterson. 3 women on horseback came into view, dressed in practical riding skirts and wide-brimmed hats. The oldest, a stern-looking woman with iron-gray hair, raised her hand in greeting. "Hello, the camp. We're looking for Frank Ashford's place." Sarah lowered the rifle, relief flooding through her. "This is it. I'm Sarah Ashford, Frank's wife." The women exchanged glances and the gray-haired one dismounted. "I'm Martha Kane. This is my daughter Lucy and my neighbor's daughter Emma. We heard in town this morning that Frank had gotten married sudden-like, and we wanted to come by and welcome you proper." Lucy, a friendly-looking woman about Sarah's age, smiled warmly. "And to make sure you weren't being kept out here against your will. We've learned to check on such things." "No, nothing like that," Sarah assured them quickly. "Frank has been nothing but kind. It was a quick decision, but the right one, I think." Martha studied her with sharp eyes. "You're the one who was supposed to marry Robert Peterson. It was not a question." Sarah nodded, her stomach clenching. "Smart girl running from that snake," Martha said approvingly. "And Frank Ashford's a good man. Known him since he came to these parts. Works hard, keeps his word. You could do worse. We brought you some things." She gestured to the bundles on their horses. "Figured you came to town with just what you could carry, and that's not much for starting a life out here." The women unpacked supplies that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. A proper skillet, a sack of flour, beans, sugar, coffee, a warm shawl, soap, a hairbrush, even a small mirror. Lucy shyly offered a book. "It's just a collection of poems," she said, "but I thought you might like something to read." "I love reading," Sarah said, clutching the book like treasure. "My father owned a bookshop. I grew up surrounded by books. Thank you. Thank you all so much." Emma, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "There are good people out here, Mrs. Ashford. It's a hard land, but we look out for each other. You're one of us now." The women stayed for an hour, sharing advice and stories, making Sarah feel less alone. Martha told her about the community gatherings, the barn raisings, the way neighbors would come together when trouble struck. Lucy showed her the best way to make sourdough starter and promised to bring her some from her own batch. Emma told her about the school they were hoping to start in Tascosa and asked if Sarah might be willing to help teach, given her education. "I would love that," Sarah said, feeling possibilities opening up before her. "I would love to be useful." After they left, Sarah sat by the fire with the book of poems open in her lap and felt something she had not expected to feel so soon. She felt like she might have found a home. Frank returned as the sun was setting, leading a heavily loaded pack horse. His face was weary but satisfied. "Got the claim filed," he announced, swinging down from his horse. "The land is officially ours, and I got supplies. We can start building tomorrow." He noticed the new items around the camp and raised an eyebrow. "Looks like you had visitors." Sarah told him about Martha, Lucy, and Emma, and Frank's expression softened. "They're good people. Martha's husband runs the mercantile. Real honest folks, not like Peterson. I'm glad they came by." "Did you see Peterson in town?" Frank's jaw tightened. "I did. He tried to make a fuss at the land office, said you were engaged to him and I had stolen you. But Reverend Thomas was there and set him straight, told him you were legally married to me now and Peterson had no claim. He finally backed down, but he looked mean about it. I don't think he's finished causing trouble." Sarah's brief sense of peace evaporated. "What will we do?" "We'll be careful," Frank said seriously. "Once we're on our land and building, we'll be 15 miles from town. That's far enough that he can't bother us daily. And I'll make sure you're never alone if we have to go to Tascosa for supplies." He reached out tentatively and touched her shoulder, a brief, reassuring gesture. "I won't let him hurt you, Sarah. That's a promise." They ate dinner together, and Frank told her more about the land, describing the exact spot where he wanted to build the house. There's a rise that catches the morning sun but has shade in the afternoon. The creek is just a short walk away. We'll start with something small, just 2 rooms, but we can add on as we go. As we need more space. Sarah understood what he was not quite saying. As their family grew, if they had children. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she felt a strange flutter of anticipation. With Frank, the future did not seem like something to dread but something to work toward. That night, lying in the tent again, Sarah thought about the question she had asked him. Can we build a life together? He had said yes. And today, watching him return from town with supplies and plans, seeing the way the neighbor women had welcomed her, feeling the first stirrings of possibility and purpose, she began to believe it might actually be true. The next weeks passed in a blur of hard work and small discoveries. Frank hitched a wagon and they moved to the land, setting up a more permanent camp near the building site. True to his word, Frank slept apart from Sarah, giving her space and privacy. But they worked side by side every day, and in the working, they began to truly know each other. Frank taught Sarah how to mix mortar and how to lay the foundation stones he hauled from the creek bed. She learned that he sang softly to himself when he concentrated, usually old hymns he had learned from his mother. She discovered he was patient with her mistakes, showing her again and again how to do things right without ever making her feel foolish. Sarah surprised herself with how quickly she adapted to the physical labor. Her hands blistered and then calloused. Her arms grew stronger. She learned to read the weather, to predict when rain was coming by the way the wind shifted. She cooked over an open fire, baked bread in a Dutch oven buried in coals, washed clothes in the creek and hung them to dry on bushes, and in the evenings they talked. Frank told her about the first time he had seen the prairie, how overwhelming and beautiful and terrifying it had been. Sarah told him about her favorite books, the stories she had loved as a child, the way her father used to read to her by lamplight. They discovered they both loved music, though neither could carry a tune. They both wanted children someday. They both believed in working hard and dealing honestly. "What made you so sure you wanted to help me?" Sarah asked one night as they sat by the fire, bone-tired from laying foundation stones all day. "You could have just ridden past." Frank was quiet for a long moment. "My mother," he said finally. "When I was about 14, she went through a bad time. My father was good to her, but he didn't always understand her sadness. I remember watching her stare out the window sometimes with such loneliness in her eyes, and I couldn't help her. I was just a kid. When I saw you by that tree, crying like your heart was broken, I saw my mother. I saw someone who needed help and deserved better than what they were getting. I couldn't walk away." Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears. "I'm glad you stopped." "So am I," Frank said softly. He reached out and took her hand, the first time he had done so since their wedding day. His hand was warm and rough and steady. "I know this isn't a normal way to start a marriage, and I know I told you we'd let things grow natural. But I want you to know, Sarah, I'm already starting to care for you, more than I expected, more than I maybe should this soon." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. "I care for you too," she whispered. "You've been so kind to me, so patient. You've given me hope when I thought I had none left." Frank smiled, that wonderful smile that transformed his face. "Then we're off to a good start, aren't we?" He did not kiss her that night, but he held her hand a little longer before they went to their separate bedrolls, and Sarah found herself wishing he had not been quite so respectful, quite so patient. She was beginning to want more than separate blankets and polite distance. She was beginning to want a real marriage. The house walls went up slowly but steadily. Martha Kane came by one day with her husband Thomas and their sons, and the extra hands made the work go faster. Lucy and her husband brought supplies and good cheer. Even Reverend Thomas rode out to see the progress, nodding approvingly at the solid construction. "You're building something good here," the Reverend said to Sarah while Frank was showing Thomas the barn site. "Not just a house, a life." "I hope so," Sarah said. "I feel like I'm becoming someone new out here, someone stronger." "The frontier does that," the Reverend agreed. "Breaks some people but makes others into their best selves. I think you're going to be one of the latter." By mid-October, the house was enclosed enough that they could move inside. It was still rough, with gaps in the chinking that needed filling and a dirt floor that needed boards. But it had a roof and a door and real glass windows that Frank had splurged on. Sarah stood in the middle of the main room, looking at the fireplace Frank had built with such care, and felt a surge of pride. "It's beautiful," she said. Frank laughed. "It's rough as a cob, but it's ours, and we built it together." That night, they arranged their bedrolls in the house for the first time. Sarah lay in the darkness, listening to Frank breathe across the room, and gathered her courage. "Frank?" "Yes, thank you for being so patient with me, for giving me space to heal and adjust." "Of course. I told you I would. I know, but I want you to know that I don't need quite so much space anymore. I'm ready for this to be a real marriage, if you still want that." There was a long silence. Then she heard Frank stand and move across the room. He knelt beside her bedroll, and in the faint moonlight through the window she could see his face. "Are you sure?" His voice was rough with emotion. "I don't want you to feel obligated. I'm sure." Sarah reached up and touched his face, feeling the scratch of his beard, the warmth of his skin. "I didn't choose you out of obligation, Frank. I chose you because you gave me hope. And every day since, you've shown me what a good man you are. I want to be your wife in every way." Frank leaned down and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. It was nothing like the cold obligation she had imagined with Peterson. This was warmth and wanting and the beginning of something precious. He pulled back, breathing hard. "I want to do this right. Will you marry me again? Not out of desperation this time, but because we choose each other." Sarah laughed through tears. "We're already married, you fool. I know, but I want to do it proper. I want to stand up in front of everyone and tell the world I choose you, that you're mine and I'm yours, not out of convenience but out of love." "Love," Sarah's breath caught. "Yes, love." "I love you, Sarah Ashford. I think I started falling for you that first day when you were brave enough to run from a bad situation even though you had nowhere to go. And I've fallen deeper every day since. So will you? Will you choose me again?" "Yes," Sarah said, pulling him down for another kiss. "Yes, yes, yes." They held a second wedding on a Sunday in November, this time at the church in Tascosa with the whole community invited. Sarah wore a new dress that Lucy had helped her sew, simple but pretty, and Frank wore his best clothes, scrubbed and nervous and beaming. When Reverend Thomas asked if they chose each other freely, they both answered with voices that rang clear and certain. When Frank kissed his bride this time, it was in front of dozens of witnesses, and the church erupted in cheers. The community had put together a celebration at the town hall, with food and music and dancing. Sarah found herself swept into conversation after conversation, welcomed and accepted as she had never been back in St. Louis. These frontier people did not care that she had come as a mail-order bride, or that her first attempt at marriage had been a near disaster. They cared that she worked hard, that she and Frank were building something solid, that she was willing to be part of the community. Robert Peterson did not attend, of course. Sarah had seen him only once since that awful day in his store, passing on the street. He had looked at her with such venom that she had instinctively moved closer to Frank. But Peterson had not approached or spoken, and Sarah hoped his silence meant he had accepted defeat. She should have known better. It was a week after the second wedding, on a cold November morning, when trouble came. Frank had ridden out early to check on some cattle. He was thinking of buying from a rancher to the north. Sarah was alone at the house, mixing adobe mud to chink the gaps in the walls before winter truly set in. She heard the horse approach and turned, shading her eyes against the morning sun. Her blood ran cold. Robert Peterson dismounted and walked toward her with purpose. "Mr. Peterson." Sarah kept her voice level, though her heart was racing. "You're not welcome here." "Is that so?" Peterson's voice was cold. "You made a fool of me, Miss Felton, or I suppose it's Mrs. Ashford now. You came all this way to marry me, accepted my proposal, let me pay for your passage, and then you ran off like a common whore with the first cowboy who smiled at you. That's not how it happened, and you know it." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "I came in good faith, and you showed your true colors immediately. I did what I had to do to protect myself." "Protect yourself?" Peterson laughed harshly. "From what? From a respectable life with a successful businessman. You threw that away for this." He gestured at the rough house, the bare yard, the hardscrabble homestead. "For poverty and a man who'll work himself to death trying to scratch a living from dirt." "I chose a good man over a cruel one," Sarah said firmly, "and I don't regret it for a moment. Now leave." "My husband will be back soon." "Your husband?" Peterson spat the words. "That marriage isn't legal. You were contracted to me. I have your letters, your promises. A judge could overturn this farce." Sarah's stomach dropped. Could he? She had heard of such things, of contracts being enforced, of women being returned to men they had tried to escape. "I don't believe you. Try me." Peterson stepped closer, and Sarah backed up until she hit the wall of the house. "But I didn't come here to threaten legal action. I came to make you an offer. Come back with me now, marry me as you agreed, and I'll drop the whole matter. I'll even compensate your cowboy for his trouble." "Never." The word came out fierce and certain. "I would rather die than marry you." Peterson's face darkened with rage. "You ungrateful little—" He reached for her, and Sarah ducked under his arm, running for the house where the rifle was propped just inside the door. She was not fast enough. Peterson caught her around the waist and dragged her back, his fingers digging into her arms hard enough to bruise. Sarah screamed and fought, kicking and clawing, but he was stronger. He shook her hard enough to make her teeth rattle. "You'll do as I say, or I'll make sure your precious Frank loses everything. I have friends in the land office. I can make problems with his claim. I can spread word that he's a thief, that you're the sound of hoofbeats interrupted him." Peterson cursed and released Sarah, who stumbled and fell. She looked up to see Frank riding toward them at a gallop, his face thunderous. Frank hit the ground running, not even bothering to tie his horse. "Get away from my wife." Peterson backed up, but his expression was defiant. "This is between me and Miss Felton. She owes me." Frank did not let him finish. His fist connected with Peterson's jaw with a crack that made Sarah wince. Peterson went down hard, blood streaming from his split lip. "Touch my wife again, and I'll do worse than that," Frank said, his voice deadly quiet. "Now get on your horse and get off my land." Peterson struggled to his feet, spitting blood. "You'll regret this. Both of you. I'll see you ruined. Try it." Frank stepped between Peterson and Sarah, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "But know that if you come near Sarah again, if you spread lies about us, if you cause any trouble at all, I'll make sure everyone in Tascosa knows exactly what kind of man you are. Starting with the truth about your first wife." Peterson's face went pale. "You can't prove anything. Maybe not, but I can tell what I know, what others saw. Let folks draw their own conclusions. Now get." Peterson mounted his horse, his eyes full of hate. "This isn't over." Yes, it is, Frank said firmly. It's over because Sarah is my wife legally and properly and you have no claim on her. It's over because this is my land and you're trespassing. And it's over because if you push me further, I'll push back harder. Now ride out of here before I change my mind about letting you leave on your feet. Peterson rode away, but his parting look promised retribution. Sarah stood watching until he was out of sight, then her legs gave out. Frank caught her before she hit the ground, pulling her close against his chest. "I've got you, you're safe, I've got you." He repeated the words like a prayer, his arms tight around her. Sarah clung to him, shaking with reaction. He said he could challenge the marriage, that he could cause trouble with your land claim. He's bluffing. He's got no legal standing and he knows it. He's just trying to scare you. Frank pulled back enough to look at her face, his eyes searching. "Did he hurt you? Bruises, maybe. Nothing serious. You came back just in time." "I forgot my rope and turned back for it. Thank God I did." Frank's jaw clenched. "I should have realized he wouldn't let it go so easy. I should have been more careful. It's not your fault." Sarah touched his face, needing the contact, needing to reassure herself he was real and solid. "You can't watch me every moment, and I'm not fragile, Frank." "I won't break. I know you won't. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "But I don't want you to have to be strong alone. That's what marriage is, isn't it? Being strong together." They went inside the house and Frank barred the door. He checked the rifle, made sure the shotgun was loaded, and positioned them where they could be reached quickly. Then he made coffee with shaking hands, and they sat together at the rough table he had built, holding each other's hands. "I think we should go to the sheriff," Sarah said. "Make a formal complaint. If Peterson comes back, there needs to be a record." Frank nodded slowly. "You're right. We'll go to Tascosa tomorrow together. File a complaint, talk to the sheriff, make sure everyone knows Peterson's not welcome here." "Do you really think he'll come back?" "I don't know. Men like Peterson, they don't like losing. But they're also cowards at heart. If he knows there will be consequences, real consequences, he might back down." Frank squeezed her hands. "Either way, we'll handle it together." That night, Frank did not sleep in a separate bedroll. They lay together in the bed he had built, wrapped in each other's arms, and Sarah felt safe for the first time since Peterson's appearance that morning. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I should have said it before. I love you, Frank Ashford. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you see the best in me even when I can barely see it myself." "I love you too," Frank murmured against her hair. "More than I thought possible. You've made this place a home, Sarah. Not just the house, but my whole life. I didn't realize how lonely I was until you filled up all those empty spaces." They made love that night with a tenderness and urgency born of the day's fear, claiming and reassuring each other. Afterward, Sarah lay with her head on Frank's chest, listening to his heartbeat, and felt the last pieces of her broken self begin to truly heal. The trip to Tascosa the next day was tense but uneventful. Sheriff Martin listened to their account and took notes, his weathered face grave. "Peterson's been trouble before," he said. "Never anything I could prove, but I've had my suspicions. I'll have a word with him, make it clear that he's to stay away from you folks. And if he does come back, you send someone for me immediately. Don't hesitate to defend yourselves if he threatens you, but try not to kill him if you can help it. The paperwork's a nightmare." The last comment was delivered with a completely straight face, and Sarah found herself laughing despite the seriousness of the situation. They stopped by the mercantile to buy supplies, and Martha Kane took one look at Sarah's face and pulled her aside. "What happened?" Sarah told her, and Martha's expression hardened. "That snake. I've been saying for years that someone should run him out of town. Maybe this will finally do it." "Don't you worry, dear. Word will spread and public opinion matters out here. If folks know what he did, he'll have a hard time staying in business. Sure enough, by the time they left town, the story had made the rounds. People stopped them in the street to offer support. The banker's wife invited them to Sunday dinner. Even the cowboys at the saloon touched their hats respectfully to Sarah as they passed. "See," Frank said as they drove the wagon home, "you're not alone. We're not alone. That's the gift of community." The next weeks were peaceful. Winter settled in with cold winds and occasional snow. Frank and Sarah worked together to make the house more comfortable, filling the gaps, building furniture, making curtains from cloth Martha had donated. They bought 6 head of cattle to start their herd and built a rough shelter for them near the creek. Peterson did not return. Sarah heard through Martha that he had become increasingly isolated in Tascosa, his business suffering as people chose to buy their goods from Thomas Kane's mercantile instead. Eventually, word came that Peterson had sold his store and moved away, perhaps to Dallas or further east. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had not fully acknowledged she was carrying. Christmas came, their first together. They had little money for gifts, but Frank carved Sarah a beautiful wooden box for her keepsakes, and Sarah sewed him a new shirt from cloth she had saved for. They spent the day quietly together, cooking a special meal and talking about the future. "I want to start thinking about children," Sarah said shyly. "Not right away, but soon. I'd like our first baby to be born in spring or early summer if possible." Frank's eyes lit up. "I'd like that too. I think about it sometimes, what our kids might be like, if they'll have your eyes or mine, if they'll be quiet like you or stubborn like me." "You're not stubborn, determined maybe." "There's a fine line," Frank said with a grin. He grew more serious. "Sarah, before we do this, before we bring children into our lives, I need to tell you something. I'm happy. Happier than I ever thought I'd be. You've given me everything I dreamed of and things I didn't even know I wanted. I want you to know that in case I don't say it enough." Sarah moved to sit on his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I'm happy too. Truly happy, not just content or comfortable. When I think back to that day on the stagecoach, how terrified I was, how hopeless I felt, I can barely believe this is my life now. You saved me, Frank." "We saved each other," Frank corrected gently. "You gave me a reason to make all those dreams real. Before you, it was just plans and someday. With you, it became now and us." Spring arrived with a rush of green grass and wildflowers. The cattle thrived, and Frank bought 6 more, along with a bull. He built proper fence around the garden plot Sarah had planned, and together they planted vegetables, hopeful for a good harvest. Lucy brought over starts from her own garden: tomatoes, beans, squash. In April, Sarah confirmed what she had suspected for a few weeks. She was pregnant. Frank whooped with joy and swung her around carefully, then immediately became overly protective. "You shouldn't be lifting that," he would say, or "let me carry that," or "maybe you should rest." "Frank, I'm pregnant, not dying," Sarah finally said, exasperated but touched. "Women have been working through pregnancy since the beginning of time. I'll be careful, but I'm not going to sit idle for 9 months. I know, I just want to take care of you. You do take care of me." "Every single day." She kissed him. "But trust me to know my own limits, all right." The pregnancy was not easy. Sarah had weeks of sickness where she could barely keep food down. She tired easily and had strange cravings that Frank did his best to satisfy. But as her belly grew, so did her sense of excitement and anticipation. She and Frank spent evenings talking to the baby, making plans, choosing names. "If it's a boy, I'd like to name him after your father," Frank said one night. "What was his name?" "Henry." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Henry John Felton. He would have loved you, Frank." "Then Henry it is if it's a boy. And if it's a girl, they discussed options, finally settling on Claire Marie if it was a daughter. But in their hearts, they both somehow knew it would be a boy. The barn raising in June was a community event that brought everyone together. Neighbors from miles around showed up to help raise the frame of the barn Frank had planned. By the end of the day, the main structure was up, and Sarah, 7 months pregnant and proud of it, served dinner to 30 people in their yard. "Look at what you've built here," Reverend Thomas said to them as the sun was setting and people were beginning to head home. "Not just buildings, but friendships, a community, a real life. We couldn't have done it without help," Frank said, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "That's the point," the Reverend said with a smile. "Nobody does it alone out here. We all build together." In August, on a brutally hot afternoon, Sarah's labor began. Frank rode like fury to fetch Martha Kane, who had delivered half the babies in Tascosa, and Lucy, who had promised to help. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day. Frank paced outside the house, praying and worrying, while inside, Sarah fought the hardest battle of her life. But when he finally heard the cry of his newborn son, all the fear vanished in a rush of overwhelming joy. Martha appeared at the door, smiling widely. "You have a son, Frank." A strong, healthy boy, and Sarah came through like a champion. Frank rushed inside to find Sarah propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. She looked up at him with eyes full of wonder. "Meet Henry," she whispered. Frank knelt beside the bed and looked at his son for the first time. The baby was red-faced and squalling, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists waving. He was the most beautiful thing Frank had ever seen. "He's perfect," Frank breathed. "You're perfect. I can't believe he's really here." "Believe it," Sarah said with a tired laugh. "He made his presence known quite emphatically." Those first weeks with baby Henry were a blur of sleepless nights and constant learning. But they navigated it together, Frank taking on extra work around the house so Sarah could rest and recover. Sarah teaching Frank how to hold and change and soothe the baby. They marveled over every tiny detail: his little fingers, his rosebud mouth, the way he would quiet when he heard Sarah's voice. "Look at what we made," Frank said one night, holding his sleeping son while Sarah rested. "Look at this miracle." "We did good," Sarah agreed, watching her husband and son with a full heart. "We did real good." Life settled into a new rhythm. The cattle herd grew. The garden produced abundantly, and Sarah spent hours preserving food for the winter. Henry grew from a tiny newborn to a chubby, happy baby who smiled at everything. Frank built additions to the house: a proper bedroom for them, a small room for Henry, even a front porch where they could sit in the evenings. On their second anniversary, Frank surprised Sarah with a gift. He had saved money and commissioned a sign for their homestead. It read Ashford Ranch in carefully carved letters, and Frank mounted it on a post at the entrance to their property. "Now it's official," he said, grinning. "We're ranchers." Sarah laughed, holding Henry on her hip. "We certainly are." "Who would have thought that girl crying under a tree would end up here?" "I did," Frank said seriously. "The moment you said yes, I believed we could build something good, and we have, haven't we? We've built a life together. Can we build a life together?" Sarah repeated the question she had asked that first day. "You promised me we could, and you were right." "I'm usually right," Frank teased, then yelped when Sarah swatted him. "Don't get too proud of yourself, cowboy." "Too late," Frank said, pulling her and Henry into his arms. "I'm proud of everything we've built. This house, this ranch, our son. But mostly I'm proud of us, of how we took a desperate situation and turned it into something beautiful." The years unfolded with the kind of fullness that Sarah had never imagined possible. Henry grew into a bright, energetic toddler who followed his father everywhere, trying to help with chores on stubby legs. 2 years after Henry, Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Claire, who had her father's blue eyes and her mother's auburn hair. And 2 years after that, another boy they named James. The ranch prospered. Frank's careful management and hard work paid off, and the herd grew to nearly 100 head. They hired a ranch hand named Daniel, a young man who had come west with dreams much like Frank's had been. Sarah started helping with the school in Tascosa, teaching reading and writing 2 days a week while Martha watched the children. They had struggles, of course. A drought one summer that had them worried sick. A winter so harsh they lost 10 head of cattle. Henry broke his arm falling from a tree, and Sarah had never been so frightened in her life. But they faced every challenge together, supporting and sustaining each other. On their 5th anniversary, Sarah stood on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the prairie. The house had grown to 6 rooms now. The barn was full of healthy cattle. The garden was flourishing. Henry was chasing Claire around the yard while Frank held baby James, pointing out the evening star appearing in the darkening sky. Sarah touched the ring on her finger, still too large, though Frank had offered many times to have it sized. She had refused. The loose ring reminded her of where they had started, of the leap of faith they had both taken, of the question she had asked and the promise he had made. "What are you thinking about?" Frank asked, coming to stand beside her with James asleep on his shoulder. "That day we met, how scared I was, how hopeless everything seemed. And now—" Sarah turned to look at him, at this man who had offered his future to a broken bride, who had kept every promise he had ever made to her. "Now I have everything I never knew I needed. You, our children, this life we've built together. I'm not broken anymore, Frank. You helped me become whole." "You did that yourself," Frank said softly. "I just gave you a safe place to heal. You're the one who chose to be brave, who chose to hope, who chose to build instead of just surviving." Henry ran up to them, Claire toddling behind. "Papa, Mama, look, I found a bird's nest with eggs." They walked together to see Henry's discovery. The whole family gathered close. As they stood looking at the tiny blue eggs in their nest of grass and twigs, Sarah thought about beginnings and fragile things that needed protection to grow. She thought about how far she had come from that broken woman by the tree, how much she had grown and changed. That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah and Frank sat on the porch together, watching the stars emerge one by one. "You ever regret it?" Sarah asked. "Taking a chance on a stranger?" "Not for one single second," Frank said firmly. "Best decision I ever made. Do you regret saying yes to a crazy cowboy with more dreams than sense?" "Never," Sarah said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You asked me if we could build a life together. We've done more than that, Frank. We've built a home, a family, a future. We've built love." "Yes," Frank agreed, pulling her close. "We've built love, and we're going to keep building it every day for the rest of our lives." The stars wheeled overhead, vast and bright in the Texas sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the smell of earth and growing things. And on the porch of the Ashford ranch, 2 people who had started with nothing but hope sat together, holding hands, secure in the knowledge that they had built something that would last. Years continued to pass, each one adding its own chapter to the Ashford family story. Henry grew into a young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, learning everything Frank could teach him about cattle and horses and the land. Claire surprised everyone by showing an aptitude for numbers and business, helping Sarah keep the ranch accounts and planning for the future. James, the baby, turned out to have a gentle way with animals that made him invaluable during brandings and roundups. The Ashford Ranch became known throughout the territory as a place of integrity and quality. Frank's cattle were sought after, his word trusted. Sarah's work with the school earned her respect throughout the community. They were asked to stand as godparents for several babies, to give advice to young couples starting out, to help make decisions about the direction of Tascosa itself. But their proudest moments were always the small, private ones. Henry's first solo cattle drive at 15, returning dusty and exhausted but beaming with pride. Claire reading to her younger brother by lamplight, patient with his stumbles over difficult words. James carefully splinting a calf's broken leg and nursing it back to health. Family dinners where laughter flowed as freely as the food. Sunday gatherings where friends and neighbors filled their home with warmth and noise. On their 10th anniversary, the whole community threw them a celebration. It had been Martha's idea, and she had organized it with military precision. The town hall was decorated with wildflowers, tables groaned under the weight of contributed food, and a fiddle player provided music for dancing. "Seems excessive," Frank muttered to Sarah as they were led to seats of honor at the head table. "Hush and enjoy it," Sarah said, squeezing his hand. "People love us, Frank. That's what this is about. We're part of something bigger than just ourselves." Reverend Thomas stood to make a speech, and the room quieted. 10 years ago, I married Frank and Sarah twice. The first time was an act of desperation and hope. The second time was an act of love and commitment. Today, we celebrate not just their anniversary, but what they've meant to our community. Frank and Sarah Ashford have shown us what it means to build a life together. They've shown us that sometimes the most beautiful things come from the hardest beginnings. They've shown us that love and hard work can create miracles. The crowd erupted in applause, and Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. Frank wrapped his arm around her, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "I told you we could build a life together," he whispered in her ear. "You were right," Sarah whispered back. "About everything." They danced that night, their children watching with delighted grins. Henry danced with Claire, carefully leading his sister through the steps Frank had taught him. James sat with the other young children, tapping his foot to the music. Friends and neighbors took turns dancing with Sarah and Frank, offering congratulations and affection. As the evening wound down and they rode home under a full moon, Henry driving the wagon with James asleep beside him and Claire humming softly, Sarah looked at Frank's profile in the moonlight. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I'm the luckiest man alive," Frank said simply. "I have everything I ever wanted and more than I ever dreamed of, and it all started with you saying yes when you had every reason to say no." "I'm the lucky one," Sarah countered. "You saw me at my absolute lowest and offered me hope. You've spent 10 years proving that your word is good, that your promises meant something. You've been the best husband, the best father. You've been my partner in everything." "Partners," Frank agreed, as he had so many times over the years. Now and always. They reached home to find the house dark and quiet. Henry carried James inside while Claire helped her mother with the food baskets. They tucked the younger children into bed and sent Henry to his own room, then stood together in the main room of the house they had built with their own hands. "Remember when this was just a foundation and a dream?" Sarah asked. "I remember everything," Frank said, pulling her close. "Every nail we drove, every stone we laid, every laugh and every tear, every moment that brought us here." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion of deep love. Afterward, Sarah lay with her head on Frank's chest, listening to his heartbeat, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant again." Frank bolted upright, nearly dumping her onto the floor. "What, really?" Are you sure? Sarah laughed at his excitement. Yes, I'm sure. I wanted to wait until after the anniversary celebration to tell you. I wanted it to be just us. Another baby, Frank breathed, his hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. Sarah, that's wonderful. I can't even find the words. You're happy then? Happy, I'm over the moon, 4 children, can you imagine? This house is going to burst at the seams. Then I suppose you'll have to build us bigger, Sarah teased. Consider it done. Frank kissed her deeply. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this life, this family. Thank you for every single day. The pregnancy was easier than the previous ones, perhaps because Sarah knew what to expect now. The morning sickness was mild and she felt strong and healthy throughout. The children were excited about a new sibling, already arguing over names and making plans. In the spring of 1889, Sarah gave birth to another daughter, whom they named Rose. She was a tiny, delicate baby with wisps of dark hair and Frank's blue eyes. And from the moment she drew breath, she had her entire family wrapped around her little finger. She's going to be spoiled rotten, Martha predicted when she came to visit, watching Henry carefully hold his baby sister while Frank hovered nervously nearby. Completely, Sarah agreed cheerfully. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Life with 4 children was chaotic but wonderful. The house rang with noise and laughter. Henry, now 17, was taking on more responsibility at the ranch, and Frank had begun teaching him about the business side of ranching, not just the physical work. Claire, at 13, was already talking about going to a proper school back east, though the thought of her leaving made Sarah's heart ache. James, at 11, had declared he wanted to be a veterinarian and was reading every book he could find on animal medicine. And Rose, the baby, toddled around after everyone, determined not to miss a thing. On a summer evening when Rose was 2, Sarah found Frank sitting on the porch, looking out over the land they had built their life on. She sat beside him, taking his hand. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "How fast it all goes," Frank said quietly. "Seems like just yesterday you stepped off that stagecoach scared and alone. Now look at us. 4 children, a successful ranch, a whole life built from nothing." "Not from nothing," Sarah corrected gently. "From hope, from hard work, from love. From you saying yes when you could have said no. From you offering when you didn't have to." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. "We did this together, Frank, every single bit of it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. The cattle grazed peacefully in the near pasture. From inside the house came the sound of Henry teaching Claire a new song on the guitar he had saved up to buy. James was reading to Rose, his patient voice explaining words she was too young to understand. "Do you remember what you asked me that first day?" Sarah said after a while. "You asked if we could build a life together, a real life, not just survival." "I remember. I want to answer that question now with everything we know after all these years." Sarah turned to look at Frank directly. "We haven't just built a life together, Frank. We've built something extraordinary. We've built a legacy. We've shown our children what real love looks like. We've created a place where people feel welcome and safe. We've proved that sometimes the biggest blessings come from the hardest beginnings." Frank cupped her face in his calloused hands. "I love you, Sarah Ashford. I have loved you from the beginning, and I will love you until my last breath. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. And you are mine," Sarah whispered. "My rescuer, my partner, my love." They kissed as the sun set behind them. 2 people who had started with nothing but hope and built an empire of love. The years continued their steady march. Henry married a rancher's daughter named Elizabeth and brought her to live at the Ashford Ranch, building a small house on the property so he could continue working the land with his father. They gave Sarah and Frank their first grandchild, a boy they named Frank Jr. And Sarah wept with joy the first time she held him. Claire did go east to school, studying business and finance, but she returned after 3 years, declaring that Texas was in her blood and she had no desire to live anywhere else. She began helping manage not just the Ashford Ranch, but several neighboring properties, her sharp mind and fair dealing making her sought after throughout the territory. James went to veterinary school in Austin and came back a qualified veterinarian, setting up practice in Tascosa and treating animals for miles around. He married a teacher named Alice, and they built a house in town, though James was at the ranch so often he might as well have still lived there. Rose, the baby, grew into a beautiful young woman with a kind heart and a gift for music. She taught piano and singing, bringing culture and grace to the rough frontier town. She eventually married a lawyer who came west seeking opportunity, and they settled on a small farm between Tascosa and the Ashford Ranch. By their 20th anniversary, Frank and Sarah were surrounded by not just their 4 children, but their spouses and grandchildren. The Ashford Ranch had grown into one of the most successful operations in the territory. The house had been added onto so many times it was nearly a mansion, sprawling and comfortable, always filled with family. On that 20th anniversary, Sarah stood in the same spot where Frank had first helped her up from beside that scraggly tree. Frank stood beside her, his hair now touched with gray, his face lined with years of sun and wind and laughter. "This is where it all started," Sarah said softly. "Right here. I was so broken that day, Frank, so lost and afraid. And look at you now," Frank said, putting his arm around her waist. "Look at everything you've built. Look at the woman you've become." "Look at what we've built," Sarah corrected. "I couldn't have done any of it without you. You gave me the space to heal, the support to grow, the love to flourish." "We gave that to each other," Frank said. "That's what partnership means." They stood together as the sun set, painting the sky in the brilliant colors of a Texas evening. In the distance, they could see their house, lights beginning to glow in the windows as their family gathered for the anniversary dinner. Grandchildren's laughter drifted on the evening breeze. "Can we build a life together?" Sarah repeated the question she had asked 20 years ago. "I asked you that with such fear in my heart. I wasn't sure it was possible, but you promised me we could, and you kept that promise." "We both kept it," Frank said. "Every day, with every choice, we kept that promise. And we're still keeping it," Sarah said, turning to face him. "We're going to keep building this life, this love, every day we have left. And when our days are done, our children will continue what we started. The Ashford name will stand for something. For love, for integrity, for the belief that broken things can be made whole." Frank kissed her tenderly. "I love you, Sarah. Thank you for saying yes to a crazy cowboy all those years ago." "Thank you for asking," Sarah whispered against his lips. "Thank you for seeing possibilities when I could only see endings. Thank you for every single day of these 20 years. They walked back to the house together, hand in hand as they had walked so many miles over the years. The family gathered around the long table, grandchildren squirming in their seats, children now grown calling for attention. Frank and Sarah took their places at the head of the table, and a hush fell. 20 years ago today," Frank began, his voice carrying easily in the quiet room, "I stood in a church and married the most amazing woman I've ever known. It was the second time we'd married, actually, which is a story your grandchildren are too young to hear just yet." Laughter rippled around the table. "I made promises that day," Frank continued. "Promises to love and cherish, to support and honor. And I want you all to know that keeping those promises has been the greatest joy of my life. Sarah, you've given me everything. 4 incredible children who have grown into people we're proud of. Grandchildren who light up our lives. A home that's more than just walls and a roof. You've given me a real life, a rich life, a life worth living. Sarah stood, her hand in Frank's. 20 years ago, I was broken and lost. I had traveled hundreds of miles to marry a man I'd never met, only to discover he was cruel. I sat under a tree at the edge of town, crying because I thought my life was over. And then Frank rode up and offered me hope. He offered me his future when I couldn't see past the next moment. He asked if we could build a life together, and I had just enough courage to say yes. She looked around the table at the faces of everyone she loved. That yes was the best decision I ever made. We have built a life together. Not just survived, not just gotten by, but truly built something beautiful and lasting. And all of you, our children and your spouses and these precious grandchildren, you're the proof that love and hope can create miracles. There was not a dry eye at the table when she finished. Henry stood to propose a toast, his voice thick with emotion. To Mom and Dad, who showed us what real love looks like. May we all be half as lucky in our own marriages. To Frank and Sarah, the family echoed, raising their glasses. The dinner was filled with laughter and stories, grandchildren being passed from lap to lap, memories shared and embellished. As the evening wound down and the younger children began to yawn, Sarah felt Frank squeeze her hand under the table. "Happy," he murmured. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Sarah murmured back. They sat together long after the children had taken the grandchildren home or up to bed, the house finally quiet around them. Sarah rested her head on Frank's shoulder, utterly content. "You know what the best part is," she said softly. "What's that? We still have more life to build together. More days, more memories, more love to share. This isn't an ending, Frank. It's just another beginning." "Always another beginning with you," Frank agreed, kissing the top of her head. "I wouldn't have it any other way." They climbed the stairs to their bedroom, the house settling around them with the comfortable creaks of a well-loved home. Through the window, the stars shone bright over the Texas prairie, the same stars that had witnessed their first tentative steps toward each other 20 years ago. Sarah stood at the window, looking out over the land they had worked so hard to build their life on. Frank came to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, and she leaned back against his solid warmth. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," Frank replied, "now and always." They went to bed wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that they had built something that would last long after they were gone. They had taken a moment of desperate hope and transformed it into a legacy of love. They had proved that broken things could be made whole, that courage and kindness could create miracles, that two people working together could build a life worth celebrating. And in the morning, they would wake up and continue building, as they had done every day for 20 years. Because that was what they did. That was what they would always do. Together, the Ashford Ranch would stand for generations, a testament to the cowboy who offered his future to a broken bride and the woman who had asked, "Can we build a life together?" The answer had been yes. The answer would always be yes. And the life they built together would shine like a beacon for everyone who came after, proving that love, hope, and hard work could create something truly extraordinary.